I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. It is ready, set, go for the 2024 presidential race, and welcome to Perino on Politics, where we give you everything you need to know from a 30,000-foot view of this week in politics. Joining me today with a look ahead for the presidential candidates is my friend and crowd favorite, Fox News chief political analyst, Brit Hume. Brit, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Dana. Thank you.
So I just came from a chit-chat with Jimmy Fallon, who said, wow, you get to talk to Brit Hume? And he said you were on his radio show one time, and he says, he's just the best. And I think that is absolutely true. You are somebody who, if you're coming up on TV, like on Special Report on the panel, I have to shush everybody in the house so I can hear what you're going to say.
Well, that's high praise, Dana. Thank you very much.
And I will also say, as a plug for people who know me, they know that I love to read. Brit's daughter, Virginia, is one of the best novelists of our time right now. Really a fabulous book she wrote called Haven's Point. Takes place in Maine, and it's historical fiction. So it's modern day, taking place around World War II as well. And I think it's one of the best books, and she's working on another one. So we're looking forward to that.
Thank you, Dana. She'll appreciate that very much.
She
I certainly do.
Is great. So, Brit, we were together a couple of times last week. One was for Super Tuesday, and the second was for the State of the Union. And now that's behind us. So I guess we could be glad about that. But now we enter the longest general election in history. And how are you thinking about covering this election between now and November?
Well, I think we're in for a kind of a lull, because until the conventions this summer, I'm sure these two candidates will continue to campaign and spar with each other and so on. I think there are a couple of things to watch. One is, it appears to me at this stage that President Biden has embarked upon the project you could see in his State of the Union address. You could see it in the apology that he gave for having called the alien who killed that young woman illegal. He is trying very hard to solidify his base behind him, which sort of shows you where the Biden campaign is. I mean, the old rule of thumb of politics in a campaign is, first you solidify your base, and then you reach out beyond that. He's worried about his base, and with good reason. They got a significant number of Democrats who think he's too old to be running, who wish he weren't, and wondering whether he has the stuff to even make it. That's why that address, shouted as it was and as unattractive as I think many people thought it was, served a purpose for him. As for Donald Trump, he's facing something like the same challenge. He needs to broaden his base. If you look at the polling going back a number of years and compare it with where he is today, he really hasn't moved a lot. What's happened is Biden has declined, but Trump is still under 50%. He's always been just under 50%. He needs to get above that. It's a two-way race now, basically. Although some other candidates could affect the long-term outcome. I'm not sure he's ready to do that either. He looks to me like he wants to rambunctiously be his old triumphant self. And so far, I don't think he's done much to reach out to voters beyond his base. So I think those are two candidates with that same challenge. Neither one of them is doing much about it yet.
I noticed that, too, in the State of the Union. And it was something I was watching for, which was we talk a little bit about problems within the Democratic Party for Biden, with some blacks, Hispanics, and young people pulling away from him or being uninterested and definitely unenthusiastic about his candidacy. And he really did try to say to them, I hear you, I'm with you. And I did think that his walk back of using the term illegal for the migrant who is now the arrested murder suspect of Lake and Riley, it seemed to me that signals a lot of weakness on behalf of the president and some strength that's somehow unimaginable to me, who worked in a White House, to imagine a president saying, actually, you're right, I never should have said that.
Well, I think, when there's a good reason to apologize, I've always believed that apologies are a sign of strength in a person.
Yes.
You're basically owning something you've done. People like that. But that's not where he is. And, the White House is claiming today that this wasn't an apology to to the alleged killer. I don't think it was an apology to the alleged killer either. He was apologizing to Democrats in his own party on its left fringe who would be upset by the use of the term illegal alien, which is exactly where the word is. That's the word that's used in our laws. It's common parlance. It's what we call them. It's true. And so when you're apologizing for something that's true and accurate, which is what he did and has been doing, it is, as you suggest, it's a sign of real weakness.
What do you think about the political realignment we're living through? And I wonder if you could maybe you'll give a historical perspective too about a lot of Democrats who switched over to become Reagan voters and then have stayed sort of with the party. But now we're living through a middle of a realignment where, for example, when I was working at the White House, college-educated voters almost always voted Republican. And now they almost always vote Democrat. There's been this really interesting flip.
Well, I think, we found out in 2016 that a big piece of the Republican base was deeply disaffected with the Republican Party for a number of reasons, and deeply disaffected with it. And on the other side, there was deep disaffection with the Democratic Party from parts of its base. And so what's happened is that each of those elements of the party's bases have gravitated toward the other party. We now have blue collar people who would be traditional Democrats voting for Donald Trump, liking Donald Trump. They are sort of the parallel to the Reagan Democrats. They're Trump Democrats, or they are angry and disaffected Republicans who feel like they've been let down by the party's establishment. And by the same token, you have people who are offended by Trumpism and by what they've seen from the Republican Party, who are in the Republican base, who have shifted to the Democrats and were part of the very large constituency that elected Joe Biden in 2020. It's been a remarkable shift of sort of tectonic plates from each of these parties to the other party.
It kind of helps keep me interested in this long general election race. How do you advise people listening who are concerned, or maybe they have family that are concerned about where they get their news and worries that it is biased or that they can't trust the information? The trust in journalism and institutions is way down.
It certainly is and deserves to be. The media have behaved themselves terribly. When I was coming along, Dana, as a young reporter working on a newspaper, this is 1965, and the very thought that any one of us reporters I was working on an afternoon paper in Hartford, Connecticut, the very thought that you would ever try to inject your own opinion into a story or slant the story in such a way that it clearly favored one side or the other in a dispute. You just did not do that. You didn't even dare to try. You'd never get it past your editors. It just was absolutely a no-no. Now, there was a journalistic reason for that, and a good one, which was, people need neutral news. It was also a business reason, which was you were trying as a news organization to appeal to as wide a cross-section of people as possible. And the way to do that was to be neutral. Nowadays, we're in the world of niches where publications and even TV networks are engaged in trying to appeal to one segment of the electorate or another. And the country is so big now that if you can appeal successfully to even a niche within that, you can be profitable and successful. You can't do it the old way by as we used to do by building up a large circulation to appeal to advertisers. What you're doing is you're appealing to people who are subscribing to your news service or watching your channel. And that's how it works. And it's a major, major change. And I think one not for the better.
Do you think that President Trump and President Biden will debate this fall?
Well, I wouldn't, I think probably so, but I wouldn't bet anything that I value on it. I think, look, Biden, the thing you understand about senile people, the reason I speak with some knowledge about it is that I'm 80 and I know what it's like when your memory's starting to leave you and you can't call names to names that you knew 10 minutes ago to mind, and you forget details and things slip away from you. It happens. And I think that, Biden could summon himself as he did for the State of the Union for that evening to show energy at least. He might be able to summon himself for one debate. He did in 2020. I was saying back then, Dana, that he was senile, and because I recognize the symptoms from myself and friends of mine, there's no doubt about it, and it's worsened. But he might be able to pull himself together for one debate. I doubt seriously he'd do more than that, but who knows? But you don't underestimate the possibility that he could have a good night. And then, of course, the bar for him in a debate would be very low, and the bar for Trump would be pretty high. So you mentioned in the note you sent out before this that you wondered if I might have an anecdote from
save that.
Audience.
I do want to go to that, but let's take a quick break, and we'll have more Perino on politics coming up. And we're back with Brit Hume on Perino on politics. All right, Brit, I want any and all anecdotes that you're willing to give us in the time that we have. What was the one on your mind in the first segment?
Well, back in the 80s, speaking of President Biden, I was asked to do a piece for one of the political journals, New Republic, in fact, about Joe Biden. And I asked to see him. I was covering the Senate for ABC News at the time. And when I was doing evening news pieces, I rarely, if ever, used a Biden soundbite because he was so loquacious. And somebody else almost always expressed the viewpoint he was expressing, shorter and better. So I didn't use Biden. And he would not agree to see me. I asked to see him. He wouldn't agree. And he finally agreed that we could sit down and talk, and he would decide in an off-the-record conversation whether he would do an interview or not. So as I recall, we met. I think it was in the Senate dining room. And he said, "Do you have something personal against me?" I said, "No, I don't. In fact, Dana, I didn't have anything personal against him at all. The Joe Biden then was gaffe-prone and sometimes goofy, but he was friendly and outgoing and good-natured.
Yeah.
And I rather liked him. I just didn't use him." He said, "Well, you don't have any." He said, "Well, why don't you cover me?" And before I could stop myself, I heard myself say, "Senator, I think you're a windbag." And Joe Biden threw back his head, burst out laughing, and he said, "Well, you're not the only one who thinks that." And we got along fine. He did the interview. I'm not sure whether he liked the piece or not. I tried very hard to be fair to him in it. He probably didn't like it.
I had a very similar experience with him, a very similar one. So after my time working in the Bush White House in 2010, I was nominated by President Obama through Senator McConnell's office to the Broadcasting Board of Governors. This is a board where you have 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and then whoever is the Secretary of State is the 9th person. And at that time, it was Hillary Clinton. And there was going to be a swearing in at the White House. And I hadn't been back since January 20th of 2009. And I sort of felt like, no, I'm a mild critic of theirs now. And I think it'd be better if I don't go, be dignified, let them have their space. And my friends said, the Democrats who had been confirmed at the same time as me said, "You have to come with us." So I do. I'm pretty nervous. It was weird for me to feel that way, kind of, but I'm there in the vice president's offices, and he's not in there yet, so we're all mingling. And then I hear from around the door as he's coming in, he says, "Where's that Dana Perino?" And he sees me, and he throws open his arms, and my husband's there, and he puts his arms around us, gets in the middle, and he says, "I love you. I listen to everything you say. Would you just ever come work for us? I would love to have you come here. I just listen to everything you say." And I said, "Well, sir, I listen to everything you say too, so that I can make fun of it later." And again, as you said, threw back his head and he laughed. And that's why sometimes I think, the criticism I feel when I watch him, for example, one thing that really drives me crazy, Brit, is how the White House will not put him out to do like a press conference. That won't take him to the briefing room. He never has reporters come into the Oval Office and have a free flow of back and forth. And most presidents have done that. They don't like it necessarily. President Biden has very few cabinet meetings where the pool would have come in and be able to ask questions. But they constantly put Biden in front of the press going back and forth to the helicopter on the South Lawn. And because Marine One has to get ready to go, the engines are running and you cannot hear President Biden in anything that he's saying. And what he's saying is important, and all of us need to understand it. And the other day I got a little frustrated on air and said, why is it my responsibility to try to explain to everybody what he is trying to say in front of those helicopters? I told a reporter I thought they should just sit there and not ask a single question. And she said, I don't think we'd ever do that. I said, okay, well, then you're probably just going to continue to get those kind of availabilities. It drives me nuts.
I can understand that, and not being able to hear him is frustrating, and it doesn't help him because he's aged, his voice is weakened, so it makes it more difficult for him than it might have been for someone else to be heard over the noise of that helicopter. Now, Trump used to do that all the time, too. I've never thought it was a very good venue for a president, but they all have done it. Reagan used to hold his hand up to his ear like, can't hear your question, just keep going, which is a perfectly good way to deal with the thing. You know, the point you make, though, Dana, I think is right. He is personally, he can be extremely likable.
Yep.
And the man we saw the other day in that State of the Union address was not that guy.
No. How do you think today's press would have covered Reagan's age?
Well, I remember when Reagan's age became an issue. After the first debate with Walter Mondale in the 1984 campaign, Reagan got stumped on a Social Security issue that was brought up very skillfully by Mondale. And it was embarrassing for Reagan, and it made him seem like he wasn't all there. And I remember in the words of ABC News, then ABC News correspondent Richard Threlkeld, who said, he said, the people were wondering if Reagan was, okay. And that was certainly an issue. And then, of course, that gave rise in the second debate to Reagan's famous comment that he was not going to use his opponent's age and experience against him. Of course, Mondale had a long experience. It was a funny comment. I remember being there in the hall when it was said. And I remember I was covering Mondale, and I was watching his face. And he laughed when Reagan said that, along with the audience. But I could tell he knew that his chance of beating Ronald Reagan had just taken a big hit, because it was such a clever line and sort of dispelled this whole age issue. But it was being talked about. It was being kicked around. It was Reagan, whatever Reagan's failings were because of age, they were nothing like what we're seeing from Biden.
Yeah. I'll ask you one more question before we go to the third segment. What did you make of so many people believing for so long that Michelle Obama was going to replace Joe Biden as the candidate on the Democratic ticket?
There was never that I could see any basis for believing that, except it was a kind of a wishful thought. Barack Obama is to the Democratic Party what Ronald Reagan was in his day to the Republican Party. He was the esteemed hero of the party, a man they all believe was a great president of prodigious talents. And he was certainly a talented politician, to be sure. But and she was considered to be an important influence and a serious person, and somebody who could attract a lot of votes. And with that name, a winner. And never mind the fact that she'd never particularly expressed any interest in running. She'd often expressed an interest in issues. So I think that it was a wishful thought that took on a life of its own. But there was never any real basis for it, nor did she ever make a single move that I ever saw that indicated that she was putting together the basic things you need to mount a political campaign. Now, if she'd done it, the party would have swung behind her, I suppose, and all of that. But I never saw there was much basis for it. And people who know the Obamas said there's nothing.
It's not happening. You make me think of a point. I wonder how many Democrats wanted Joe Biden to fail at the State of the Union so that they would have been able to say, see, I told you we have to have a contested convention or we have to have a new nominee. But now, no, it's going to be Trump and Biden.
It's a funny thing. I think there may have been some sentiment that way. He would have had to, seems to me, for it to happen, he'd have to fall off the platform.
And nobody wants
everybody
that.
Would have said, well, nobody really wants that. On the other side, I think that the Democrats look at to Trump, and they kind of half want him to be the nominee because they think their man Biden can beat him because he did, and they half want to try to knock him out and completely. That's why you see all these lawsuits that these partisan Democratic prosecutors have brought against him, and I think the party is sort of, half. I mean, they regard him with what I would consider fear and loathing. The Democrats loathe Trump, but they're also afraid of him at the same time. And a lot of Democratic constituents, I think that he's going to turn us into a dictatorship and so on. You see people like Michael Beschloss, the historian saying that kind of thing. It's kind of silly in my view, but that's what they say.
That is what they say. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. And we're back with Perino on Politics. Brit, this is where I like to ask my friends and the smart people I try to surround myself with, like you, what might I be missing in the cycle? What are you paying attention to that, based on your experience, is something that I should pay attention to and that listeners here should watch out for?
I have a sense that in not too many years, we will look back on the beginnings of this campaign in this period right here and say, how in the world could the political system so completely have neglected, almost to the point of ignoring it, foreign policy issues? Foreign policy is really on no priority list in this campaign. And I think the world is as dangerous, if not more dangerous today, than it's been in a very long time. I think these two conflicts in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe are emblematic of that. I think the rise of China and the sort of saber rattling toward Taiwan is a further sign of it. And Joe Biden begins his State of the Union address, and he's talking about Ukraine. And I think, great. You may recall, Dana, about that earlier speech he gave where you and I disagreed about whether it was a good speech. I was so pleased that he was prepared to talk about the foreign policy issues and talk about Ukraine, because Ukraine aid was in trouble and is in more trouble now than it was then, that he was talking about it. Because remember this, Dana, there's only one institution in our country that deals with foreign policy and defense, and that is the federal government. Yeah. And the president has more say over that than any other issue. And yet it is way down the priority list. And we're going to look back on this time, I'm afraid. And the same is true of Trump. He didn't talk about it much either, except to say that none of these terrible things would happen if he were president.
Yeah,
and
they don't want.
I think we're going to look back and say, they don't want to talk about it, maybe because they don't know if they can deal with it. But this is what people need to be thinking about. We are in a dangerous place, and we need to be dealing with these issues. But people think, well, we shouldn't be spending money overseas. My God, the amount of money we're spending overseas is a fraction of our budget, and it's never been more important. And, but people start to think about we can't afford it. It seems to me that what we can't afford, I mean, if we don't have a successful foreign policy, a successful defense policy, we're not going to have a country. And, we're all worried about these other issues. Well, I'm sorry. Maybe we ought to be de-emphasizing them in favor of job one, which is the security of this country.
I remember President Bush telling me at one point that in the 2000 election, during all of those interviews, during the debates, that neither Al Gore nor President Bush, then Governor Bush at the time, neither of them were ever asked a single question about Al-Qaeda.
Yes, I remember that. That's true. And that's sort of how we are. Now, look, this country has always had an isolationist strain. You see it now in the Republican Party. Used to be back in the day in the Republican Party. And then for a long time, it was the Democrats. Now it's the Republicans again. And, you look at the votes in the House that are holding up that Ukraine bill. They're mostly Republican votes because the speaker can't afford to go without the full approval of his caucus to bring that bill to support Ukraine and other things to the floor. So that is where we are, and it's a very dangerous thing. And leadership would require a president to step up and discuss these things. I wish Biden would do it, but I don't have any hope at the moment.
Economies that are actually thriving don't need a federal government spending $1.8 trillion more than it's taking in. But that was the budget that President Biden put forward today. I don't think it would be that much different if President Trump were putting forward a budget today. And we're the third rail of politics, entitlements, nobody can talk about it. But it's one of the reasons.
The day of reckoning.
Yep, there will be.
Yeah, the day of reckoning on that is coming. That day is coming. And to Nikki Haley's great credit, she was willing to talk about it, but none of these other candidates is. And
you have grandchildren, children and grandchildren. I'm sure that when you speak this way, of course, you're thinking of their futures as well.
Well, and look, and I don't think that the dangers we face are that far off. So I'm thinking about, I'm not going to live forever, but I'll be around for some of this trouble. My father lived to be 90. That'll bring us to about the moment. If I get that far, that'll bring us to the moment when Social Security, Medicare, and those programs are going to be insolvent, and the benefits are going to have to be cut severely. And that is going to be a moment for it.
Yeah, I was thinking that whoever is president in 2032 is really going to have a difficult time. when all these bills
exactly
come due.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're letting it all happen. We're sitting here like people watching a train coming down the track, waiting for it to happen and refusing to discuss it.
Well, if they listen to Perino on politics, they have been warned, indeed. So I have a little pop quiz that we do at the end. It's a multiple choice quiz. It's one question. So let me throw it to you. It's which president is responsible for giving the White House its name? Was it A, William Taft, B, Teddy Roosevelt, or C, William McKinley?
I'm going to say McKinley, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't have known this either. It was Teddy Roosevelt. Apparently, the White House was called the President's Palace, the Presidential Mansion, or the President's House. And then the White House was originally gray. But Roosevelt said, after it was painted, let's call it the White House. And that was in 1901. So now we know.
And that in turn gave rise to what the South Koreans call their mansion, the Blue House.
That's right. That's right. Oh my gosh, I went there one time. I think it was August. Brit, it was so hot. I'll never forget that.
Oh, I know.
It was so humid.
That's right.
It was so hot, indeed. Well, I look forward to seeing you again. Hopefully we have some sort of election news to cover together between now and then.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't die completely because there are things we need to be talking about, some of which we are and some of which we're not.
Thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.